Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Word on the Snakevine. I'm your host Ross Deacon, and in this podcast we talk all about things venomous animal related, from venom research, venomous animal husbandry, animal conservation, herping, and of course snakebite and snakebite initiatives from all around this world. On this episode, I've joining me as my co-host.
Hi, I'm Denny.
Hi, I'm Ed. And before we start, I have to do a few formalities. Any views expressed in this episode are the views of the guests and the host, not the facilities or company they work for.
And today we have Venom 1's Jeff Fobb joining us today. How are you today, Jeff?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good. Is it? I hope it's nice and sunny down there in Florida.
More than we expected. It hasn't rained here in a while, and normally it's very wet by this time of year, and it's excessively dry.
Probably not good because you've had quite a dry winter as well, haven't you?
That's true. So fire season will probably be rather intense at the beginning, at least.
That's not going to be. Doesn't sound very fun at all. So, as many of you will know or have heard of Jeff before from Venom 1, I think he's been on numerous different documentaries and stuff before, including the Venom interviews, which I think most of our listeners will have watched by now, and has spoken about Venom 1 as part of the fire service and how that came about. And today we're going to explore that in a little bit more detail for our listeners. So, to start off, I think Jeff will just ask a little bit more about you, so get our listeners to understand a little bit more about you. So, how did you get into reptiles and that? With being from Florida and whatnot, I assume that local native wildlife is probably quite a big thing.
Definitely. Even though we don't have as much variety as some places, we have a fair bit, and they are ubiquitous. They're everywhere.
Yeah, I was in Florida a couple of months ago myself, and it was drive down the road and at one point it was try and dodge alligators. So it was relatively fun. So, kind of, how did you get into reptiles? Get into reptiles themselves?
The way I got into reptiles, I think, is the same way a lot of people did. You know, you have a fascination with dinosaurs, and we can't really have dinosaurs. And the closest thing, the next best thing is really reptiles. You know, crocodilians, turtles, lizards, and snakes.
So as I say, from a young age, living in somewhere that has the diversity of reptilians that Florida does, is probably quite a good place to grow up and enjoy catching. Well, I'm not sure you'd want to catch a lot of them, but it's quite a high number of venomous species there. But yeah, so kind of from being a young age, obviously you work for the fire service. So how did working for the fire service and Venom 1 kind of come about?
Well, it's coincidental more than anything. I happened to join the fire service at the same time Venom 1 was brought into Miami-Dade, and so the timing was auspicious. And one of the people I worked with had started working with them, and he invited me to join as well. Charles Seifert. He asked me if I was interested, and how can you say no? So I came along and started working with Venom 1, where we respond, venomous snake bites and things. And, it's an incredibly fascinating bit of work, to be honest. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to know. There's more than I will ever be able to I can't learn everything, but you can learn as much as you can. I think sometimes my brain is full.
It's definitely a bit of a minefield as a subject, I think. And then venom response itself is actually quite big itself. So, for our listeners, kind of, what does Venom 1 actually do, and kind of how do you guys respond to venomous snake bites and such forth?
So our primary responses are to venomous snake bites. So we'll get a call from local EMS, a hospital, or the Poison Control Center, and we will deliver medications to those. And we will do, for the Poison Control Center, what we do is we provide an assessment of that patient. Because we see them frequently, we're familiar with them, we can provide an experienced assessment. paramedics and EMTs provide patient assessments. That's one of our primary responsibilities. So in this case, it is just another disease process, another illness, another injury. It's for snake bites. And because we see them and we're familiar with the fauna, we can, and we know where the animals are found, a lot of times we can isolate as the species, or we can identify if they were bitten by a non-venomous species but have still sought medical care. We can identify that animal and kind of rule out, their need for hospitalization. A lot of people will present at the hospital with asymptomatic, no severe pain or swelling or bleeding or bruising. And we can have those people released if they have a photograph or have brought the animal in, which is not something we recommend. We don't recommend bringing the animal to the hospital with you.
And I think that service in itself, especially in an insurance-based system that is used within the United States, helped save the hospital time and money, and also the patient time and money as well with the position that they're in too. So I think that service alone is worth its weight in gold.
I'd like to think so. I think I think the service we provide is valuable because we are taking our experience with these injuries to the hospital. The Poison Control Center, while they're experienced treating, they don't get to see them. So what we provide is a verbal assessment and then a suite of photographs that we send to them, as well as like patient queries about the extent of their injury. And, but it's a chain of care like you have with heart attacks and strokes and other, brain attacks and other injuries that are complex.
And I think this is something that that people may not understand, is that Venom 1 is actually the only public-owned anti-venom store in the country.
We may not be able to hold that for much longer. There is another service in Central Florida, which is good because, we're down in the very end of Florida, the southern end of Florida. And having a few geographically located elsewhere is probably helpful, especially if they're located with a poison control center, to provide medical direction. It actually helps us spread out that service geographically without putting all the onus on one fire department or one organization.
Yeah, I think that's a very good thing for the public to be able to have, especially in somewhere like Florida, where, as you say, reptile life is very much amongst the people in a lot of the rural, especially the more rural places.
And as we build out, we noticed a trend a few years ago where, because most of South Florida was at one time Everglades, everything south of Lake Okeechobee, if you're familiar with the area, was Everglades. And then once we started draining it, some was used for agriculture, some was used for residential development and urban areas. And as that land is becoming more valuable, it's going out of food production or ornamental plant production and into building houses. And that actually creates a circumstance in which we see more snake bites, at least for a period of time. And there's actually one area of that's within our response area that you are 8 times more likely to encounter a water moccasin than you would be in the Everglades, and that's because we forced them into these small quasi-natural areas that are used for water retention and they're wetland mitigation areas.
So that's something that when we spoke to Matt Good, he was on about as well as part of urban ecologies. What they found is when they built out to Tucson, they found something similar with rattlesnakes as well. Is that they've ended up concentrating rattlesnakes around habitats that create an environment that's preferable for the animal, and the animals actually are increasing in numbers in those areas.
Because we bring food with us. We bring no matter how much you might exercise, hygiene around your house. We leave garbage there. We put plants that produce fruits that provide cover. We put water, and a water source, especially in desert areas, is going to attract food animals, and then that's going to attract predators. And in South Florida, what we generally see is evening bites. within a few areas anyway, is evening bites where the people have left their light on for security, protection from other people, and it attracts insects. The insects attract frogs and toads. The frogs and toads then attract it's primarily water moccasins in the past few years. So they come right up to the house. I mean, these are directly adjacent to the house, so it's out there by your door. And when you step out to smoke a cigarette, which is another way smoking can kill you, you step on a water moccasin, it bites you on the lower leg or foot, and then you have to seek medical care. And I think in one of the places you were about, as I think I may not have said before, you're about 8 times more likely to encounter them in the Everglades, where they're allowed to spread out over millions of acres. We have them concentrated into a spot that's probably under 5 acres, maybe as much as 10 acres, but they're all just pushed into those spots.
That's pretty incredible. So, from your perspective, what are the kind of the bite numbers that you see per year?
It varies. We did have we probably see an average. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
We probably see an average of about 20 per year. In a peak year, we've seen just a bit over 50, so around 50, 55. And I think the lowest year we had was 13. And I will tell you that in one of the areas where the majority of our snake bites came for about 2 years, and this is not necessarily proposing this as a solution. They were doing some research, and they removed a little bit under 50% of the encountered and counted snakes, and this was water moccasins primarily. And it dropped the snake bite numbers significantly, probably cut them in half or more. And I don't think it's necessarily a great idea because they're predators, but reducing human venomous snake encounters is definitely going to reduce bites. It's going to reduce the incident of injury.
And I think that's one thing that you have quite a high number of visitors into Florida in general, and I think that's one of the issues that they do foresee, isn't it? That non-locals coming in and having venomous snake interactions when they don't actually understand what they're doing or what the snake even is, especially in the Everglades areas.
I think the transplants actually, people who have moved here from other places actually create a greater number of our bites than people who are visiting. I can think of a handful of visitor bites, a couple of accidental bites, and one that was not really accidental. He was moving the snake and didn't know what it was. But I think our own, not necessarily homegrown population, but our own resident population actually comprises the greatest number of our bites. I can think of a gentleman from Canada who was wearing flip-flops because it's hot, and he was bitten on the foot by a pygmy rattlesnake. Somebody who came here from Nebraska who was bitten by a snake that he picked up to relocate and wasn't sure what it was. But really, it seems like the majority are people that live here.
That's
But I think a lot of those people are transplants from other states. People move here from everywhere. There's a lot of retirees that move down, and other people that are seeking, I guess, more hospitable climate.
Say, isn't it one of the oldest states by average age in the United States? It's relatively a common place for people to go and retire, isn't it? So.
Yeah, it seemed. Yes, definitely, and we have our winter visitors, people who overwinter here, and we create an environment that animals like. We have suburban lawns, and ponds. We put ponds in. We have sprinklers for our yard that attracts things we like and things we don't.
Yeah, unfortunately. So, taking it back a little bit, so how did Venom 1 actually start, and why did the fire service take it upon themselves to start this anti-venom bank?
So in probably the late 80s, early 90s, there were a few bites to fairly prominent keepers in Florida, And Wayne Hill, who runs the Florida Reptile Breeders Expo, actually took about $15,000 that he made in profit from the Breeders Expo and started the Anti-Venom Bank. He started a nonprofit called the Florida Anti-Venom Bank. And then a few people, Jack Vicente, George Van Horn, Dennis Sargent, I think, was in there early. And Dennis Sargent was in the fire service, so they created a cooperative agreement between that private entity and the fire service to deliver anti-venom in an emergency and to hold them at the fire department. And from there, in 1998, there was a black mamba bite in Miami-Dade County, and they were the closest resource available for the anti-venom. And Al Cruz, who was a lieutenant then, was aware of it, and he got in touch with them. The mamba bite was treated. The person survived. And then Al got on the board of the Anti-Venom Bank. And from there, he created a couple of proposals for the fire department about why this service was necessary, because a lot of the imports into Florida come in through Miami. We have U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service there. We have exotic venomous keepers in Florida, through a licensing program. And from there, it kind of snowballed into what we see today.
Yeah, I think one of the Florida licensing system for venomous snakes is probably the most robust of the licensing systems in the United States. I think it creates good keepers, good knowledgeable keepers from that system being in place, which probably helps you guys from an anti-venom perspective and from a bite perspective, because you've got, in theory, you should have more sensible keepers or better trained keepers keeping venomous exotic venomous animals, which is good for you.
The same could be said for driving, but if you've ever driven in Florida, you see that is
nobody likes to let each other in, or nobody filters at all. Our junctions are awful off the I-4. Oh, geez Louise.
And nobody indicates.
No, still have nightmares on that 6 months later. I nearly had a few accidents on the I-4. People just do not let you in, do not let you out. You stick to a lane and just hope that there's a space before you get to where you need to go. It was a bit of a nightmare all the way down to Tampa, but yeah. But so as part of the anti-venom bank, do you keep exotic anti-venoms for exotic venomous snakes as well as the local native populations as well?
We do, and we can send those with to wherever. We have access to our own helicopters. We have 4 helicopters in our fleet. We have agreements with Florida Forestry, which has fixed wing and helicopters. Actually, the forestry is mostly fixed wing, and then we have Florida Highway Patrol and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission that have access to fixed wing and helicopters, so they'll deliver it, and as will the Florida Highway Patrol and the police department, which have both of those as well. So, and in some cases, we use a logistics company that also delivers organs. So they're used to on-time, real-time delivery. Yeah. So, between those, we have a fair amount of logistic capability between all those. And, ground delivery, we can ground deliver with lights and sirens.
So do you end up delivering anti-venom to quite a lot of the United States if needed?
For certain things. We always, there's an anti-venom index that is run by the AZA. But like with a lot of projects, there are gaps in their information. Number one, a lot of times if it's a region that hasn't seen an exotic bite in a while, the Poison Control Center may have lost that institutional knowledge of where it is, how to access it, and the fact that it even exists. So we'll always try to use a prompt and say, hey, have you checked the anti-venom index? But we do know there are a few species of snake that are just not commonly kept in zoological collections. Naya Coyote, which at one time was like a ubiquitous animal. Almost every keeper had them. They just don't have them at zoos, so they're not going to have the anti-venom for it. So that was one that we would get quite frequently. That
Yeah,
would require like long distance transport.
I still think they're quite. They seem to be quite popular in the American hobby as well. So it's kind of, as you say, there's probably snakes that for a zoological collection to keep is not worth it. They've got no no conservation kind of status with them. So keeping them for a zoological collection seems to be, as you say, not priority. And that, so with that, do you allow private membership into Venom One, or is it purely a public anti-venom fund?
It's a public fund. We have hospitals that we have as members, simply because it allows us to like have an agreement with them, and then we can use the anti-venom for the native species, and provide some training to local hospitals so that we can keep them abreast of the latest changes in, the care guidelines, provide them without the algorithms that are appropriate for the species, and make sure that they contact poison control whenever we interact with them. We validate that general reminder that they need to contact the poison control center for these relatively rare injuries. That most hospitals don't see a snake. Most hospitals in the U.S. probably don't see a snake bite on an annual basis. It may be years in between bites if they see one at all.
Yeah, I think that's one of the issues that a lot of places have, is that, especially like the US and the Western world, is that actually the doctors just don't know how to treat them because they rarely see them, so they don't get trained to treat them. And then once they do get one, it's been either years since they've had the last one. So they need that kind of, as you say, that nudge to kind of say, hey, go poison control center. And just somebody there who's been through it a fair few times and can help them either identify species, as you say, or get them the antivenom that's required and the treatment plan that's required for them. I think that's one thing I've noticed in Europe and the US, is that, especially with private keepers, bite protocol seems to be quite overlooked by doctors and professionals when you come to actually needing the treatment themselves. And it's one thing we find that a doctor would rather take information and off somebody like yourself that's trained or has gone through this situation multiple times than a bite protocol or a piece of paper that somebody brings in. So do you get used quite a lot as a foundation to actually just give advice on bites and such forth outside of Florida as well? Or
oftentimes they'll call, but we have all of we're familiar with the package inserts, and we make drug information sheets, which have a lot of there's a number one drug information sheets here. The drug inserts are printed in well, to me now, because I'm older, it just looks like a gray piece of paper when it's really just such small and light type that you can't make it out. So we provide drug information sheets that provide the important information about those medications, the species that they're applicable to, and where possible, where there's some paraspecificity, which means it would cover a snake that it is not necessarily included in the creation of the medication, whether it's a Fab2 or a whole IgG, a dry or liquid formulation. So how to administer it, what the contraindications are, and they're the same for most of the medications. Some precautions that you might need, how the medicine's mixed and administered, and the primary indications for use, just so they have it in an easily digestible form. And they can look at that without having to read the package insert. And then we're always available to discuss with them, certain things. We have a little bit of technical expertise with the different medicines we've used. I've used almost every single medicine we carry, at least once, except maybe sea snake, funnel web spider, and redback. But almost all the Australian, from just about anywhere. even some of the more obscure animals we've had injuries from. So I've used them at least once. Dinocheus rhodonocutes. Good grief. We've seen so many odd snake bites over the years that it's been really quite helpful.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt, it's quite eye-opening as well, seeing the sheer kind of number of different species that people are keeping and getting bitten by in captivity. As you say, you've not had a chance to use sea snakes, but I do know that they seem to be becoming more and more popular in zoological collections in the US. So I think there's 4 or 5 different places recently. I've seen have them. Sorry, I'm getting buzzed at. Sorry about that. Yeah, so you may get a chance to see some of these species that you've not seen before. Hopefully you don't. I don't necessarily think that's one of the good things. But as you're saying there, one of the good things to come of it is giving that information to physicians about the different treatment about the different drugs and treatments that are available to the customer, to the patient, and that makes a big difference in people's lives, especially, as you say, if it's not on a black and white piece of paper. Sometimes it's easier to digest, easier to read, and take that information in. And obviously, time is tissue with these bites. So, what is the difference that you've seen from Venom 1 within the community? Because I think a lot of people wouldn't have had access to a lot of this anti-venom if you guys didn't have it. So a big impact is probably probably a bigger impact than you can measure. But have you guys seen an actual a change in the community and the kind of the impact that having the venom bank has done?
It's a hard thing to measure, and it probably varies from year to year, and it varies on any number of things. Like this year, because we can't go out and do like we do public education for children and groups that are interested, like Boy Scouts of America, Girl Scouts, any number of organizations like hiking groups for other fire departments on safety considerations and how to appropriately interact with wildlife, and which is basically leave it alone. And how do you measure that something didn't happen? So some of the things that are impact are difficult to measure. How do you show that we cannot, unless we can directly correlate that our training or our educational programs prevented someone from being bitten? How do you measure the success of the program? And we usually measure just in raw numbers, because the more exposure kids get on what wildlife's there, what wildlife can harm them, and how to respectfully coexist with wildlife that is there, they'll do inappropriate things. And some people, even after training, will continue to exercise poor judgment. So
I think with humans, you can never take away the poor judgment aspect of it, can you? I don't think it's unfortunately part of our makeup.
I question our superiority to other species in a lot of different cases.
Yeah, we may have different communication and be able to use tools more effectively, but other than that, yeah, I think there's definitely argument a few different ways, isn't there? to do it. So I think the biggest difference will probably be to physicians and hospitals, with that being able to have that support on the treatment plans. It feels like that is the biggest thing that you guys can offer, or you guys do offer to a lot of people.
Right, and that's the most measurable, and that way they know what their resources are, they know who they can call, and they know that they're not in this entire thing alone. They have somebody who's there to, provide some experience and information to them and to the patient. And in most cases, we act as patient advocates. If the patient is symptomatic and we can confirm that it was a venomous snake bite, and they need to take some measures beyond just observation and be treated, and they need to receive treatment. I think in the U.S. undertreatment is probably more of an issue than overtreatment in most cases. However, then when people see the bills that result from these injuries, they usually are appalled. I mean, frankly, you know, $200,000, $250,000, $300,000. But I mean, there's a lot of things going on there. But we act as advocates for the patient, not only from a cost perspective, but from do they need treatment or do they not need treatment perspective. You know,
I think that's definitely going on the bills. I think that's definitely one of the scariest things is that people see these receipts of different snake bites and how much they cost to actually treat. It's a lot of money, and I think the service you guys can provide with identification and treatment methods for asystematic treatment cases, and to actually help the doctors treat but not overtreat or not undertreat to make sure that the patient's correct is definitely a big thing that you guys seem to provide.
Right. In some austere areas, just survival is an acceptable outcome, and that's understandable. They're operating with limited resources, with limited access to high quality medical care, maybe with some more primitive things, just because the money isn't there, and these things cost money. But for us, our goal is always to try. It's an imperfect system, and we don't always achieve that goal. It should be to try and return that person to the environment in the same condition they were before the incident started. So if they had full use of both hands, you want them to go back with full use of both hands. You don't want them to have contractures or loss of tissue or a prolonged rehabilitation because they received surgery that may or may not have been indicated for the type of injury they had. So when you look at the cost, because it's truncated, because it's over a short period of time. Oh, it's in the hospital for a couple of weeks and it costs $250,000. When you look over the lifetime of that person, if they go without treatment and potentially lose function and primarily their dominant hand, that has a cost as well, and that may be $25,000, $50,000 a year in lost income potential, and social costs because they have a debility, then they receive government assistance. So there's other costs that we don't see that are really hard for us to digest and process because they occur over a longer period of time. And just as a species, we seem terrible at dealing with that kind of thing. We're pretty immediate or short-term thinkers, I think, in a large degree. We're tactical rather than strategic thinkers.
Yeah, I think you could. Sorry, it seems that we're having a few technical difficulties with one of our hosts. He's just messaged me just saying he can't. He seems to have dropped off the call, so he's going to drop back in a second.
Okay.
So apologise for that.
No, it's okay.
for that silence.
What I just said made any sense. I don't know if I'll be able to re-say that, but
no, it did make sense. It did make sense. I will fully admit I did have a question at mine and then got distracted, so I've lost the question, unfortunately. But
you guys involved in relocation? You've spoken about kind of education around kind of living with these animals and stuff like that, and some training. Would you guys be involved in relocations, kind of like snake removal, or would that be kind of a separate service you work alongside and you focus more on support of kind of bite cases?
We do removals because we're a public safety organization. And the good thing about us is we are all safety conscious. We deal with a lot of known unknowns and unknown unknowns and known risks. So because we're in a safety conscious field, we're really aware of how to avoid injury. I mean, that's what our whole job revolves around. And so we do snake removals, and I think oftentimes we are probably a little bit safer than some other people might be, because I have seen even our wildlife officers in their handling of the animal, we try to use the least intrusive means of removing the animal very no hands-on. If it can be avoided, in most cases it can. Do everything. If it needs something, it's in a controlled environment. If it's caught in netting or something, we'll do that in a controlled environment with the animal restrained in a tube. And I spend a lot of my time dealing with dangerous wildlife and teaching other people how to deal with dangerous wildlife. So I tend to focus on the mistakes that we make. I like to videotape a lot of what I do because you see things that you don't see in real time. And I try to be as critical of myself as I am of anybody else, because we all develop bad habits. We all do things that seemed appropriate at the time, but then as you rethink it, you could break it down and maybe do it a little bit safer in the future. I like to learn from other people's mistakes and hopefully my own, although sometimes that's hard. So because of that safety focus, we do animal removal, and because we're public safety, that is in the service of the public. Our relocations are generally, because of the state rules, on the same property that the animal's found on. And we do not like to, we're not in the business of destroying animals. That's just not why we got into this line of work. So if we do a removal, there's some cases in which the animal cannot safely be released on the property because of the population density in the neighborhood in which it's found. And what we try to do with those is repurpose them and take them to one of the venom extraction facilities that are located in Florida. And the good thing is it's rare. So we're not pulling animals out of a healthy population and just putting them to no use. They're taken to one of the 3 facilities in Florida that I just took a coral snake to a facility in Central Florida a few weeks ago. They show up in pools and yards. It's not my favorite thing to do. If they're near the Everglades and it's a large property, we'll take them right back to the edge of the property that's adjacent to the Everglades and release them. We tell the people they may show back up. This is part of their territory. We live here. We can learn to coexist. If you notice, it didn't try to attack me. It didn't respond until I got close. We offer some little, some tips on what they can do to prevent injury and prevent injury and leave the animal to his devices that even on their property, because their likelihood of encountering it is rare. We only had a few re-encounters with the same animals because we chipped a few, and they would end up back in the same places. After about a 3-month period, they were back.
I think the educational part of the removals is probably quite a big thing, especially in that kind of area where you would where people should be will be interacting with these snakes and other reptiles at quite frequent intervals within their life or within the year. I'm going to ask a silly question now. So you say you do snake relocations. Have you had to do any gator relocations?
We have to do that as well, and we actually had a license to remove them. Generally, we're not going to do the ones that are in the water. That's where they live. That's for the state nuisance alligator program. However, if one shows up in the back of somebody's yard, and it's an immediate problem, or it's in traffic, which does happen, or it's by a school, or it shows up at the fire department headquarters, which is also an issue we had. One that was missing a leg and an eye showed up at our headquarters in like a little wet area right adjacent to our daycare center that we have for people that work at the building, and that one was removed. So we remove gators as well, and I spend a lot of time with these animals, trying to make sure that I do, because they're perishable skills. I try not to lose those skills, and as I get older, my eyesight gets worse. I definitely try to spend a little more time and learn how to do things easier.
And with gators, that's probably a big thing, but actually being able to keep those skills honed with such a big, powerful animal.
Exactly. And the weird thing is when we're younger, I'm going to depend on my strength and my agility and my reflexes. As I've gotten older, I do that less and less. Yeah,
no doubt. It's quite hard quite a hard thing to maintain is your strength and reflex. Well, reflexes especially as you get older. Strength maybe not so much, but yeah, nuisance alligators probably aren't as much of an issue from a injury standpoint than the venomous snakes that are out there. To be fair.
Yeah,
Probably
even though the alligator population is enormous, we probably have well over 1 million alligators in the state. They don't injure people very often. I mean, it happens, but it's a handful of people a year. We worry about the strangest things. And honestly, with most animals that are truly nuisance animals, where they are no longer afraid of people, where they associate people with food, people have created that animal. Either through poor hygiene, throwing food, fish parts or whatever into the water from their boat, or throwing bait fish in the water. The alligators are smart. I think snakes are probably smarter than we give them credit for, and they learn behaviors that we teach them. They learn to associate us with food in many cases, and then we've created a nuisance animal. We've created an animal that had a fear of human beings, and we've made them into something that now approaches people because it wants to be fed.
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 with it, isn't it? I think people don't realise the consequence of their actions until their actions bite them. So it's a bit of a catch-22 with that one, unfortunately.
It is. Actually, having dealt with people and their animals, horse people sometimes teach their horses bad habits. Dog people teach their dogs bad habits. A lot of times inadvertently by rewarding them for exhibiting a behavior that they shouldn't.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a bit of a vicious cycle. So with being so close to the Everglades and the issues that the Everglades has with invasive animals, is part of the snake relocation, do you see many exotic snakes rather than the native snakes?
We see a fair bit, a lot, because they're bigger and they're more visible, and for most people they're a lot more frightening. We do see a fair number. I think in a peak year we removed just over 100 Burmese pythons. You
really don't realize the state of the issue there until you hear that kind of numbers.
And now we've got more people doing it, so our numbers have dropped a little bit, but I mean they're still there. We still get them. And tegus, actually, one of my coworkers, Lieutenant Chris Pecori, he picked up a tegu today in pretty much the middle of a suburban area, same area where I found an African crested porcupine at night a few years ago.
Oh, geez. You don't realize that they're such a problem, and obviously with them being invasive, these animals aren't allowed to be re-released, which is not particularly nice, but is necessary to try and save native populations of the animals there. But I think it can work both ways, because obviously the food source for certain animals, such as the alligators and stuff, they now can have a different prey item that they can prey on with some of the mammals that are there. But obviously the destruction and everything that comes with the invasive animals is non-recoverable in a lot of ways, unfortunately.
Yeah, and there doesn't, the Burmese pythons, when they're small, are probably food for a lot of animals. Now, we do record what they eat, but we're not recording what's eating them, because unless somebody's there to witness it, there's not photographic evidence that they're being eaten by hawks or by egrets and herons. And occasionally you'll see an alligator with a large one, but it's just because of its size and the fact that it's around people that even gets documented. But certainly there can't be any natural predators, but that doesn't mean there are no predators for the small ones. And to be honest, if I were a bird, I would rather eat a little Burmese python that has a thin, soft skin than an equivalently sized water snake, which is going to poop in my face and has very rough and what feels like an unpleasant thing to eat. It feels to me like an unpleasant thing to eat.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? This is such an issue of something that should have not been that much of an issue, and obviously then you add to that the iguanas, the chameleons, as you say, the mammals, the different mammals that are there that shouldn't be there, and it's just creating such a diverse
We have Gambian pouch rats on Grassy Key. I think they've been extirpated twice, but I think we need to go 10 or 20 years without seeing another one. African rock pythons occur in about a square mile area in just one location. In my own yard, I've got agamas, amoeba, basiliscus, quadrivitatus, I think is the species, tokay geckos. What else? A bunch of the Asian geckos that hang around. Well, they used to be Bufo marinus, and now I can't remember the genus name. But those are all just in my yard.
Yeah, that's pretty mad when you think absolutely none of them are native species. That's and all of these
it must
are
also be quite like, if you take away the negative impact, it must be fantastic to be able to see that range of species in such a small space. From kind of a reptile lover aspect.
It definitely produces mixed feelings.
So from that, are you seeing? Sorry, we're asking so many questions on this. Is we've not had any. I've not had anybody to ask these questions to before. It's are you seeing non-native exotic venomous snakes also being caught and found, or is it?
We've had a few documented releases. There was a cobra in. I think that one was killed. There was a cobra in Fort Myers, I think, or Naples area. And that one was destroyed by a neighbor, which is, that's understandable. And there was one loose in Ocala that actually had his own Twitter feed that was never found, so there's no telling what happened with that animal. But a lot of these will just disappear and never be seen again.
I think that
they avoid people.
And the Everglades is such a big area as well. If somebody was to want to give up keeping and release these animals, they're probably going to be able to release them without even being seen or the animals ever being seen again. It's quite a scary prospect, really, isn't it? That you just don't really know. And if you're not seeing bite records of them, you don't know if you've got an issue with a wild population of them.
Yeah, that would be. I hope we don't ever document that.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I hope it doesn't ever happen, because even if we don't document it, it does not mean it didn't happen.
No, exactly. I think it would be quite a scary prospect if that was to happen. So, with Venom 1 being a public service, kind of what is seen to be the future of Venom 1? Obviously, you mentioned earlier that another Venom bank is opening up within Florida and such forth as well. No doubt that they've asked you for some help with that and kind of to understand how you guys started and how you guys got into it and the service you guys give to people.
Right. It's another fire service based organization. And I mean, it's ideal because we're used to we're there 24 hours. So it's not like calling a business that is closed. We're there for 24 hours. We have the ability to respond to other calls. So it's kind of an ideal organization to have it. We already have medical training where EMTs are paramedics. Everybody on Venom 1 is a paramedic and an officer, because that means they've been on the fire department for a while and have experience. So they asked us questions about how we're structured and the types of incidents we run on, and then how we organize the bank and about minimum stocking levels. And actually that brings me to another aspect of what we would like to do in the future, because we would like to get Florida. We have the anti-venom index for the U.S., but I think for Florida, it would be nice to have our own that includes those fire service-based organizations and maybe even some of the private keepers that keep their own anti-venom, because then we will be able to allocate dollars in a more judicious way so we don't have a lot of duplication, and then everybody can know where the closest appropriate anti-venom and where they can get it at need. And I think it would help us use our budget dollars, which are not infinite, in a better way, in a more efficient way, probably the best way to say it.
Yeah, and I think that with it being a public service, it's kind of would be, as you say, would be highly beneficial to you guys to know what antivenoms you've got compared to other people, compared to what you guys need to stock or don't need to stock, because another antivenom storage facility has got them readily available. I think it's such an interesting prospect, especially from a European standpoint, because obviously what you guys are doing is very similar to the service that, not necessarily the service we have, but how our antivenom is stocked. But in a country where stocking your own antivenom is seen to be the right thing to do for a private keeper, I find it really kind of an interesting prospect that actually there should probably be these things more readily available, like you guys offer. I think it's a fantastic thing what you guys are doing there and saving people's lives.
And saving limbs, which I consider equally important. I think that goal, it's laudable. It's not always achievable again, but it's laudable that we can we provide the information that helps guide healthcare and for the best possible outcomes for patients. It's really important. It's something that people don't think about, especially when you're young and you feel like, oh, it's just a little mild bite. I'm not gonna. But I don't know if you've ever seen, there was on Reddit at one time a thread called The Progression of a Rattlesnake Bite. Non-fatal bite to right index finger. Eventually, the necrosis sets in and he removes the bone from his finger. So he goes from, it's non-lethal. However, that right hand, that right index finger is no longer functional and probably had to be removed eventually.
I think he said at the time, his words were, I would rather the bone, he said, I'd rather leave it and not have part of my hand amputated, because he'd already had a finger amputated on that from a rattlesnake bite on that hand or something. And he said it was worse not having the finger than having a finger that was unusable. It was a very odd logic.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of confirmation bias, which goes back to our decision making.
Yeah,
being suspect at best.
Yeah, definitely. And I think because also the cost of treatment, it puts people off as well going to hospitals for bites and stuff, and they're more willing to ride out. I think he was from quite a poor area, wasn't he, within the United States, and he wasn't a particularly well-off person, and one of his excuses was that he just purely couldn't afford it. His insurance wouldn't cover it, so he's going to have $100,000 bill minimum to pay if he went in to have the correct treatment, and that's quite a scary prospect for people to be in.
It is. It definitely is, and it seems perverse, considering the potential quality we have for medical care in a first world country, that people would not seek medical care because of something like that. It seems kind of perverse.
It does, and we could probably sit and have a couple of hour debate on the healthcare system within the USA, and probably still not come to an answer if it's the right thing or not. I think that's probably something that some of the podcasts should debate rather than us. But
probably.
But I think from the service that you guys give, and it allows people to keep some of their freedoms as wanting to keep of animals, or if they are bitten while they are hiking or they're walking or within their own home, they've actually got a treatment. They've got some way of being treated from a sheer accident that if you weren't there, would they have that? And that's the scary aspect of this all, really.
Yeah. When we first queried hospitals, very few hospitals, because the bites are rare. Like, the bites are really, 20. There's probably a bite per hospital, but they're not distributed equally to every hospital. Some hospitals will see 4 or 5 bites in a season. Some will see 10 to 15, and others will see none for several years. And then someone will get bitten by something and not pay much attention to it for the first half hour. Say, oh, it hurts a little bit. But then once the swelling sets in and maybe a little bit of bruising, they seek medical care near their home, which may be removed from those outlying hospitals, and it may be somewhere in the interior of the county. And then that hospital goes, well, what do we do with this?
Yeah.
We don't have the medicine for it in our pharmacy. Is it better to move an entire patient who has a potentially life-threatening injury, or is it better to transfer medicine to the hospital in those circumstances?
Yeah, and as you say, you've then got the chance to they've got with you guys being there, they've got the chance to get that medical attention that they need and they deserve. As you say, to maintain their life and their quality of life that they have. And I think that's a really good spot to end this podcast episode on. Thank you so much, Jeff, for coming on. It's been really insightful, and I hope our listeners if they haven't heard of Venom 1 before, now kind of have a bit more of an understanding of Venom 1, of the work that you guys in the fire service down in Miami are doing, and understand that actually the anti-venom is available from you guys and whatnot. So, and I think that's a great thing. So again, I'd just like to thank all our listeners for joining us today, and please remember to go to our website, wordonthesnakevine.co.uk, for all our past and previous episodes, as well as some merchandise that's available. And thank you so much for all joining in, and good night all.